Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have an awesome episode for you with painter Audrey Stone. Audrey's based in Brooklyn, New York, and she makes these incredibly beautiful color field paintings that are incredibly luminous, incredible color harmonies, but they're also done with like very, very specific small steps of bands of color, which make them so like mind-blowing in terms of the level of patience and execution that goes into the creation of these pieces. And that's kind of where our conversation started, was sort of like how she goes about cultivating this type of mindset to work with such a distinct process of doing these slow bands of color, slowly shifting those colors across the canvas. She kind of referred to them as like walking them across the canvas in certain ways. So we talked a lot about like that process, but we also talked about sort of where her imagery might come from. We talked about the importance of art and how it can play a role of uplifting our spirits, how it can be sort of a guiding light for us in terms of instilling more hope and positivity, how it can also be sort of a field of meditative inquiry, and how her works can kind of act in that sort of way for people. And so our conversation went to a lot of really interesting places related to not only art making, but also the role of potentially art could have in our culture, especially in relation to technology. We talked a little about AI and the influence of technology in our lives, and how art and the human touch can be a great counterbalance to this sort of modern world that we're in. So I think y'all are going to really enjoy the conversation a lot. And so here you go, Audrey Stone. All right, Audrey, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you, Martin. Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to meet you here.
Yeah, so nice to meet you. And I'm so grateful that you're joining me here. Like I was kind of talking to you before we hit the record button, like as soon as I came across your work some years ago, I was immediately just drawn into them, not only for like the beauty of light and color, the luminous qualities you do, but also really appreciating sort of the very slow sort of process that it seems that it takes to paint the way that you paint, breaking apart these gradients of color into their subsequent like layers and sort of steps of shift in value or shift in sort of color themselves. It seems like very meditative. It takes like a very sort of patient and devoted type of personality to be able to paint in this way. And I'm really curious sort of how you began painting in this way and why, because I feel like it takes a lot of effort and time and patience, which some people just aren't able to conjure, but it seems like you can do it so flawlessly and beautifully. So that's sort of where I'm really interested to begin our dialogue, is sort of how you've got into painting in this way and sort of what you feel like it does for you.
I appreciate what I feel is your deep looking at the work. So thank you for that. I have been told I'm patient, so I must be so patient when people look at my work sometimes. So I don't know if I am. I often feel very impatient, but I think the development, I could say the development of the gradients. And when I went straight to painting, because I've been doing mixed media, it was always kind of adding of color. And at first the colors kind of butted up against each other, and I was painting right out of the jar.
Mm-hmm.
Like this blue against that blue, against this red, against that gold. And then I started mixing color. Now I'm a mixologist, like I just mix. And it's really, my process is really often about going from one, I don't know if I want to say a pure color or one height of one color to gradating into the next height until it feels satisfying. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's a lot about measurement, the process, and in terms of the bands of color, the actual measurement, as well as the amount of paint that goes into the next paint, and making the colors feel right too. Sometimes there's mistakes, and I let the mistakes happen, and that might change the course of the painting
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. It's often subtle because the work is pretty subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I like the mistakes because I feel like it shows the handmadeness of the work. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, so I guess another question I have. So you're doing it all by hand. Are you using any tape? Are you
yeah,
masking it all?
I'm
You
gonna
are.
tape
Mm-hmm.
to create those edges, the
Yep.
boundaries, one to the other. And I think of it's the work usually starts from either the center out or from one edge to the other, from the top to the bottom, or the
Mm-hmm.
right to the left. There's often symmetry in the work. But it's kind of like, I feel like it's a process, like a movement across the canvas, like as if you were taking a walk, as if
Mm-hmm.
you're taking a walk, so I'm taking a walk with the color across the canvas.
Yeah. I mean, I just think I mean, it's so funny how you say, like, everyone tells me I'm patient. I must be patient, but I don't feel that way. And I can totally relate to that. But I feel like maybe that's part of, in some unconscious way, why you paint this way, because it is cultivating patience, even, and maybe something you're aware of that, like, you want to work on maybe intuitively. And so this painting is forcing you by your process to slow down and not get so caught up in a result, but really be invested in process and showing up and being able to, like, really meet the work where it is and take it where it needs to go for that particular day. Some artists, when they show up, they get so much done in one day in the studio. But I'd imagine for you, there might be some days where it feels like you barely got any done, even though you've been painting for hours, just because of how many steps you do. One thing I'm curious about, because as I look through, like, your body of work, I love how you sort of vary the measurement of the bands themselves, how sometimes they're very, very close together and very, very subtle, but sometimes they're like a little bigger jumps in shifts in color, almost creating a rhythm to the way that the color is moving across the canvas. Do you think, and it makes me think sometimes of musical harmonies, or like, I feel like there's a relationship to, like, sound experience through my visual perception when I look at them. Is this something you think about as an artist in terms of, like, illustrating some sort of, like, tonal vibratory quality like sound has through color?
I wish I could say yes. I mean, I do listen to music in my studio. I think of it more as a visual language and a visual rhythm because
Mm-hmm.
I'm dealing with color, and to me, color is its own unique language that I feel
Mm-hmm.
is like an emotional feeling language. So for me, in terms of those bands and whether things are really dense and tight or more expansive, has to do with just creating a visual vibration, like a
Yeah.
visual sense, because when I'm working with gradient, I can really sense the color in a physical way,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
vibration that happens within the paintings, and it depends on where you are in relation to them. So that's what I'm after. I think it does relate to music because people, like recently, someone's like, I wonder what you listen to when you're painting. They thought I must be really into Steve Reich, but that's how you say that. I need lyrics. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
lyric kind of listener.
Cool.
But I listen to a lot of different kinds of music, but
Yeah.
I don't think of it as musical, but that's an interesting, there might be something in there more subconscious than there is, but I think of it more visually.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely totally think about it visually, but sometimes, like, when I think about the reality of, like, what a light wave is, in terms of how we see color, it's a wavelength of a specific frequency, and, like, sound is a wavelength of a specific frequency. So there is this kind of relationship between the two, even though they, like, have a different effect or a different sort of outcome in our perceptual field of experience. But I do
Yeah.
see that there, but I just feel like there is this quality of harmony, of, like, the way that the light kind of, like, really comes out of the work. It's very, like, I don't know, it almost, like, penetrates my consciousness and, like, opens me in, like, a really beautiful way. I feel like there are these color fields of, like, meditative experience that you can have enjoying them and looking at them. They can be sort of almost like these mirrors in which we can meditate into, to kind of self-reflect. When you're working on them, I'd imagine it's probably every day is different because our energy and our mind is different. Some days it probably feels very meditative and very zen. Some days it probably doesn't. But is this something that you strive for through painting to like cultivate a certain state of mind? Or is that something that's sort of secondary?
I think I don't think it's so conscious for me, but I definitely want there to be a sort of uplift a lot in the paintings. A lot of the paintings, I think, there is kind of an expansive feeling to them, or a contracting and expanding kind of thing that happens within
Yeah.
and that is breath, I guess. That is kind of a depiction of breath in that sense. Not that I'm doing that consciously, but and I think, Sean, I'm just looking at a painting in the corner of my eye, kind of thinking about like the expanse, and that's, the color. But I'm really mostly focusing on, when I'm working in my head, I'm focusing on the color and on my visual experience with the color, how I want the color to feel. Is the color, the dark, like, and I do it very basically through color theory stuff, like a total, like just whatever I know. I feel like color's kind of like what I know about color, how color feels to me, what this color is going to feel next to that color, the combination of those colors, and how do I want the movement of those colors to proceed, I do studies for most of the paintings, not all of them. I mean, so I have a sketchbook that is like linear drawings of paintings, and then sometimes they go to little paintings on paper for each one, but
cool.
not all. Sometimes they go right to the
You just go
canvas.
right into it, huh?
Yeah, which, you never know. And also the studies are often extreme, like totally different than the paintings.
Really?
Because
is that where you're like working out like color combinations, like thinking about how colors are mixing together, or like is that sort of what you're playing around with in your sketches?
Yeah, I'm mixing, thinking about colors, the general composition. So I might choose like, a dark blue and a green and a light blue, and then I realized, well, I'll switch up that green and see what happens in the big painting, and it turns into something totally different.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
color is so fascinating.
yeah.
I see, like, for me, I feel like it's always can be so surprising. There's so many variations and nuances that you can create with color, especially when you're mixing so skillfully and thoughtfully the way you do. Because like just subtly shifting even through pigment choices, or the way that you use like complementary colors against each other, or the way that you mix like tints, like going toward white, like you start to find some like really interesting in between colors, between like their height of saturation into whatever sort of value you're moving into, or whatever tonal shift you're moving into. And to me, like as a painter myself, like the mixing in the palette is always for me so exciting and interesting and playful, but can also like have this edge of frustration if I have this color in mind and I just can't seem to figure it out. And you're working mostly in acrylic, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All water-based.
All water-based. What's your reason for that?
I just, I didn't pay. I was an oil painter in undergraduate school, and then after undergrad, I eased out of oil painting and switched to acrylic purely for the expense, I believe, at the time, and kind of being floundering in what I was doing. And then I didn't paint for a long time. I actually did mixed media.
Oh,
I
cool.
did all sorts of sculpture and different things. And then I got back into, we all have I have a long trajectory of what I did and where I've been, but, having kids, and then what did that did to my process, and how much time I had to devote to it, different kinds of outside work and stuff like that. But then when I went back to painting, it was through actually Flash, because Flash has such an amazing color range.
Yeah.
But then I've more kind of moved on to acrylics, a variety of acrylics. So I still use a little bit of flash, but not as much.
Well, acrylic these days is just so good. I mean, there's just gotten so much better acrylic paint. And then also, I think I would imagine for the way that you're layering, if you were working in oils with the masking and the amount of layers, you would just talk about taking forever. It would take a really long time, especially if you want to maintain the integrity of those edges, so even as subtle as they can be. But I feel like you have such a keen like sensitivity to color and to like these subtle shifts that you can do. So like on some of them when like they're really, really tight and you can barely, it almost looks like it's a smooth gradient. And then as you look closer, it blows my mind like how little shifts there are, like how you're able to be so patient in the mixture of the color. And there is, to me, this emotional quality always to color. I feel like you can never really separate color from emotional experience on some way. And I've noticed on your website about one of your past solo shows, I think it was By Fire, or is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And how you were talking a lot about like real emotional, raw experiences in your life and how those were sort of woven into the intentionality of the paintings in a certain way. And I found it to be so beautiful the way that you referenced Leonard Cohen talking about music, right? Leonard Cohen's work, and how like you're sort of using your art as a way of processing emotional life lived experiences. Has this something that like just in that body of work that you were like really trying to tap into, or is that something you're always kind of thinking about how like your day-to-day life and the experiences you have being Audrey in this world on this planet at this time, like coming into and informing the work in such a interesting way? Because on the surface they could be very formal and more about like perception and phenomenology and color theory, which they are, but I feel like I can just tell through the screen that there's more going on there, almost in relationship, I think of like Mark Rothko and the color field paintings and his experience with emotion and how to express emotion through those paintings. And so I was wondering if we can maybe talk a little bit about that, because I find that to be a really important and interesting translation as an abstract painter, to like bring in concrete life experiences into an abstract field of imagery.
Yeah, it feels a little loaded, but like definitely I feel I do the By Fire series, and most of my work does come through the personal. The personal is painting, I guess, but like I sometimes they're more just formal abstractions that are ideas, visions that I want to see. Sometimes there's a deeper kind of personal story that can drive a whole series, although you as a viewer would not know the backstory. And I think of that as it's a way for me to think about the color in relation to what I'm doing, if I'm thinking about it in relation to experience. And it's also kind of ties into the micro macro thing, because even though like say the By Fire series came from a very intense period of loss for me personally and my family, it was really like we all go through these losses. It's not just me, it's not about my loss, it's about loss and whatever. And so it's kind of like I think of it more in that way, like not that the paintings, Martin, you should look at my painting and know what this is about. In that case,
exactly.
Here's my diary, it's more like, embedding a little emotional something into the work besides the formal.
Yeah, because you're tapping into like, because I feel like the way that you paint, you're tapping into like a universal language that anybody can experience, and but you're also tapping into universal experience of life, which is loss, right? And this is something that we can't escape from on this planet. It's encoded in the experience. It's pretty much a guarantee for all of us. And so you're speaking to this kind of universal experience through the lens of your own personal, subjective story of that. But I found that to be really beautiful and really amazing to think about, like how even a work that has an abstract formal appearance, there is more involved, even if you're never really going to know the story. But I feel like you can feel that energy because you can feel it through, again, the devotion and the patience and this sort of dedication you have to your process. You can feel that there's just, because otherwise, like to do the work like you do, if you don't have something else probably driving it underneath, it could probably get boring or it can get really frustrating quickly. But when you have sort of something you're emoting through your process, I feel like that can help you stay the course in times of great frustration. But I found that just to be a really surprising and beautiful component to that particular body of work. And it really informs in some ways the way I look at all the work you do, and to remember that this isn't a machine making this. This isn't some computer algorithm creating these grades. This is a human being spending time mixing paint, laying the tape down, crafting whatever the form ultimately will be that it takes, and putting in the time to execute it. Like there's just so much more involved in it. And I think to me, that's the saving grace in a lot of ways of art in times of great technology is that a human being is making it and putting that time in, because we do live in a very interesting situation with the emergence of AI technology and computer generated art. It's a conversation a lot of artists are having. Like, are these just tools? Like, are these going to take our place? Like, are they going to become better than what we can do? And I personally feel like they never will, because the human touch is something so powerful and impactful that like you can't replicate it through a computer necessarily in terms of the actual physical tactile touch of a hand to a brush to the paint to a surface, what have you. How do you feel about like that component of art emerging? I saw you kind of like roll and lift your eyebrows a little bit. Like I feel the same way, but I'm curious, like what's your perspective on maybe some of that? Because we can see a lot of the type of imagery you make, like we could see that AI could generate that, but to me, that's not the point.
Well, yeah, it's definitely not the point for me either. And I mean, I don't know enough about AI to really speak in depth about it. But for me, there's always an element, a human element to making art. And so to me, that's what makes it interesting. For me, that's what I want there to be a human touch to my work. And sometimes through the screen, people see my work through the screen, they can't really, oh gosh, sorry.
Oh, you're okay.
Yeah, no, a call was coming in.
So yeah, no problem.
So sometimes through the screen, I feel like they can't really see the work. And they think it's digital, or they think, they don't get quite the tactile nature of the work. And I think it's important for us to experience as living beings. I mean, I'm just imagining, you go back to the caves and those cave paintings and putting a hand on the wall and saying, I was here. I mean, this is all of our own way of saying we're here. This is what it's like to be here right now.
Yeah.
For each of us individually. So I think that's why people want to seek out art, is to have that experience. And unfortunately, I mean, like, it's a different generational thing. I mean, AI, computers, and all of that. I mean, I see the way my kids are growing up with social media compared to growing up without it. And it's really, really different. And I don't think it's so healthy for the most part.
I know.
But it's what it is. I don't have control over that. So, so AI will have its own AI art, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Never can replace the human art. Yeah.
I don't think so either. And I think that I feel like as we emerge more deeply into this technological future that we're crafting currently and living within, like that we're going to need more and more of the human touch to balance that out, because it can be so sterile and so like seemingly like apathetic in a way. And I feel like that we're going to need more and more of the human touch, and to bring back the material, tactile, sort of physical sensation of life into our experience, because when we're sucked into the screens, into the scroll, into the social media verse of false perceptions, we are going to get incredibly lost from what it is we're actually doing here in a way. And I think that ultimately it's about building bridges and connections and communication, which the internet can do. But we're seeing sort of the immaturity of the internet age right now. Like, I feel like we're still trying to figure out how to integrate this technology into our life. And this is the idealistic mindset that I might have, but I feel like art is the ultimate like counterbalance to all these things. Like, and so I think more and more people are interested in those experiences of going to galleries and museums. And I think I hope, and I feel like I'm seeing more and more people growing interest in that, because it does counteract this sort of impatient, instant gratification mindset that the internet sort of cultivates. Because when you go to a gallery, go to a museum, you have to slow the hell down. Yeah. And you got to really be present in your body, and you got to really use your faculties of your senses to be aware of what's being presented in front of you. And I think that is such a beautiful experience for people to have in this fast-paced world. And so I hope we see more of that. But I think what's so cool about your work is that people think that they're generated by like some computer, but they're actually made by hand. That is like an amazing, that I would hope anyone who thinks that's like an amazing, like, wow moment for them. Like, holy crap, like this is not done by computer, but is done by a human being with incredible sensitivity and patience and love toward what they're doing. And so I want to see more and more of that. But I'm curious, another component to your work is the actual forms that the gradients and the light and the luminosity take. Sometimes you're working in more of like these square formats of descending color, like either descending into space or like ascending, like coming toward, or, you know what I mean? Like this depth moving in and out, kind of expansion, contraction. But sometimes you play with curves. And sometimes you play with even like these diagonals where you cut the gradient off and it's kind of a flat field within it. So it's like this really like kind of formal play with the image itself. And I'm curious where like your inspiration comes for the actual, let's say, structure that this process gets contained within.
I don't even know. So I think, I don't know about you, but like I get flashes of images of compositions. Mm-hmm. Like that's how my ideas, they come in a little flash. And then if I'm on a roll with a body of work, it'll be like, oh, and then I could do it this way. And then I could do it that way. Wait, what if it came in like this? What if it came in like that? So that's a lot of the way, like they just come as, like little idea bursts.
Yeah.
And when I'm working on like a group or a series, it's just kind of a way of creating like story within story within story, I guess, and changing up, challenging myself too, to do something a little different, know. So I don't want to always have straight lines. It's good to have some curvy lines. I don't always want to have curvy lines. It's good to have straight lines. You know, I don't want to be vertical. Sometimes I want to be horizontal. Sometimes at an angle. You know? So,
yeah, for sure. So kind of playing with those approaches, but maybe initially like it's almost like the seed for a bunch of paintings comes from like a flash of insight, or like you might even call it like a vision that you have, like, or sometimes I refer to it as like a download. It's like I just downloaded something from the universe and it just flashed through like my consciousness, and now my job is to harness it, grab it, and manifest it. Like I personally know what you mean, like a flash of an image. Like I feel like that happens for me too. Sometimes it's like a dream, or like when I'm in meditative states, like I get those kind of like downloads, or like just these like simple snippets of a vision, and then I have to do the work of pulling them out. And then once you pull that initial seed out, then also it's like the variations of how you can play with that. So your willingness to play with that, I think is so important to keep things fresh for you, so that you're always trying to kind of like find a new component to this language that you're developing, because ultimately you're developing this very personal language in painting. And then the language is just evolving the more that you speak it, the more that you paint it, the more that you use it. But I look at some of the geometries that you're using, even though they're sort of simple and subtle, but like you are playing with geometry. Are you at all interested in sort of like sacred geometry, like thinking about like the golden mean, Fibonacci, fractal geometry, thinking about like even like I think of like various sort of mandalas or like imagery geometries used in spiritual imagery. I think of Kabbalah and like Jewish mysticism and like the tree of life and some of the geometries in there. Has that ever been an influence for you, or is that anything you're interested in?
I can't say that I have been, honestly. Like, I love the idea. I want to learn more about those things. I mean, Fibonacci certainly is something I'm super aware of, and I was really aware of it with a body of work I did on paper with sewn drawings, which used thread and pencil and ink.
Cool.
Had a lot to do with counting, and I guess Fibonacci kind of made me aware of proportions in a different way in terms of spacing my bands of color and stuff like that. I haven't really studied the sacred geometries, which maybe it would be cool to look into. But I kind of feel like there is like, I don't even know how to say this, like a natural mathematics or something like that just come through, just count. I mean, it's so basic for me, counting.
Yeah.
You know, like pacing and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5. Or if you've ever been a lap swimmer, you know, like you know, I used to be a lap swimmer, but I never was a counter. I was more just like into the stroke and the swim.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, you're kind of playing with like intuitive geometries. Like we all understand basic polygons, or like how we can play with various patterns and number in terms of descending or ascending order, or how we repeat things. I was just curious because I do see some of that in there intuitively, but I can also tell that it's maybe not like conscious or intentional necessarily, but like it's just through your just sort of natural mathematics, as you said, like kind of they just kind of come through in that way. But I find that to be a natural place for you to like end up exploring too, because of the way that you're doing the paintings themselves and the way you're interested in these forms and sort of how that they evolve not only through light and value or color, but also through shape themselves, the way that they're sort of containing the light in certain forms. But I think it's just something interesting that maybe something you could explore too, because I could find that to be maybe very fascinating for you if it's something you're already kind of innately interested in. But I find personally, like when I study these things, that it's just there's such a vast history of exploration and sort of how mathematics can speak to, like, let's say, a spiritual creative principle underneath the surface of life. Because I feel like the world we live in with this, like, you know, consumerist materialist paradigm that we're in can really fall into this space of nihilism, of like a lack of meaning and purpose. And I feel like for me, when I see art that is sort of leaning in that direction, I find it to be like a missed opportunity, because I feel for me personally, and this is just my personal viewpoint, that art, the ultimate aim of art in a pure sense, is to sort of reconnect us or link us back to the innate mystery of life, and to be in a state of awe and wonder and curiosity toward life again, as opposed to like banal meaninglessness that can sort of arrive in our culture much more easily than maybe it had in the past. Do you feel that way too, in terms of like, let's say, like the mission of art, or like, let's say, the potential of what art can be? Do you see this sort of tension that can happen within, let's say, quote unquote, the art world, between like art that is trying to speak toward maybe these mystical, magical, spiritual spaces, versus art that's kind of more speaking toward the market and toward consumer commercialism and sort of maybe a sense of nihilism within it? Because I can see these competing things happening sometimes within art.
I'm not sure I'm confused a little by the question, honestly, but I guess I don't really think about it. I just try and get drawn in by what I'm interested in personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I was ruminating on the mathematics thing and just thinking about it more. I think I'm just so much an intuitive type.
Yeah.
And thinking about, you think about like galaxy and stuff like that, and how we're like so tiny and how we kind of rotate out. Again, it's going back to the Fibonacci and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's I'm thinking about that. But I think we all are drawn to certain kinds of things. It has for meaning, hopefully.
Yeah.
The value of art for the individual. Like some people invest, say people who purchase art, they invest because they want to have an investment. They want to be sure that this is going to be something that they will have a return on, so to speak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think people really know when that's going to happen. I feel like living with art. I love to live with art. I have a lot of art in my house, not just mine. And I always think it's just something that draws one to something that you relate to it in one way. And it could be a figurative thing. It could be a color. It could be just a sense or a sensitivity within a piece of work,
Mm-hmm.
So I always just, that's how I go about it myself.
Yeah.
Just like to find the nuggets that I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like when I talk to people who don't know much about art but want to be more involved, I just always encourage them to look for to what spurs a little passion in them, what spurs a little spark, like, no, don't think about the rest, like that other thing. Then maybe you'll be surprised down the road, and that $5 painting will turn into a $5,000 painting. But or maybe not, or maybe it's just one will enjoy. I mean, as consumers, you enjoy it the way you enjoy, the telephone that you've used for 5 years. Like,
yeah.
So, but. Yeah, that's complicated.
It is complicated. It was a complicated question. And it is something I do think about, because when you look at like sort of how art has kind of been, I don't want to say hijacked, but really taken over in terms of by financial interests in a lot of ways. And sometimes it can not destroy sort of the purity or essence of what art making is, but at times it kind of can. And I see that, like, for example, like, sometimes it can be so hyper intellectual and so hyper academic that it kind of shuts people out. It almost feels like it almost feels like you're in the in or you're the out club. You know what I mean? And I can get, I mean, I'm a nerd about art. Like, I'm obsessed. I love to read and learn, and I love art history. I love exploring things like this, but I also have lots of friends and family who aren't as into art as I am. And when I go to art museums or certain galleries or shows, I get a lot of backlash from some of them about like some of the work that we sometimes can see in those spaces. And so I'm just curious about like what art can do, like in terms of like culture, how it can push conversations forward, how it can grow and expand the consciousness of a culture. And I think we're living in a time where we need some sort of wisdom to guide us more than ever. I feel like we are flailing in this sort of polarization and this sort of sense of hatred between one side and another. And I hope that art maybe in some way can be a guiding light or a principle or some sort of way of which to bring people together and to reconnect people to something deeper within them. And I find that like it's not going to be one artist or one work of art, but it's sort of a collective movement in art. And I see that what's happening with work like what you're doing, that feels to me, when I look at them, they feel very spiritual. They feel very meditative. They feel very like connected in a deeper sense of like the human spirit. And when I see them, they're uplifting and inspiring and engaging. And they're also inviting me for deeper contemplation. And I find work like that to serve like a really powerful purpose for individuals in their home or in public spaces, because they're offering an opportunity for people to slow down and to maybe turn inward a little bit through the experience of the painting. I don't know if you have that experience either, or if you have like thought about that for your work or other artists that you're really drawn to or whatnot. But I just find that we need to find meaning more back into our world, and I think art can be a way of helping us do that, because I think art is really wonderful with storytelling. I think we need, in a way, to like create a new story for humanity, because the storylines that we have right now are not really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I hope more people go to see art and absorb it and get what can be gotten there. And as for myself as an artist, I can just say that when I turned back into painting, I did make a conscious decision that I wanted them to be beautiful. I mean, I can't say that they're beautiful to everybody, but I wanted to experience them as beautiful, and I wanted them to be uplifting. I did want to feel like there was an uplift in them.
Yeah.
Those were conscious decisions for me.
Yeah.
Artist, like, what am I putting out into the world? I can't say that all of them are like that, because, you know, there's dark stuff that comes out too, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I think that's where I try and move to.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely feel that in them. And I think the darker components that come through are important too. Like, with all this being said, like, I think we need to be able to acknowledge the shadow side of not only our own self, but the collective consciousness as well. Because if it's all light and rainbows and we negate the shadow and we don't integrate that into our life, it becomes imbalanced. And I think that's something that we're seeing right now as a real imbalance. And so your conviction to make work that is beautiful, that is uplifting, like, that is such a powerful conviction to have, because I would say for certain periods in art, I think it comes and goes. Like, beauty was not the point or important for certain stages in the history of art, especially in modern, postmodern art, into contemporary art. But I see that coming back. I see more artists standing in this place of willing to make something of beauty and light, of upliftedness. And to me, that gives me a lot of hope, because I feel like it's speaking toward like a balancing in the psyche of the collective in some way, because I feel like things have been seemingly very dark. And I look at younger generations. I teach high schoolers. And so, like, I can see, like, even through COVID, through the political landscape, like, I can see this sense of angst and the sense of uncertainty that's welling in them in a way that's more maybe palpable than it might have been when I was coming up as a teenager, or maybe when you were, or maybe not. I don't know. But it's like, it feels like there is this feeling in them that they need to find another level of their consciousness. I feel like they're more open to bigger ideas than ever. They're more existentially curious than they were before COVID, especially when I think about my students before and the ones I have now. They're more curious about bigger questions of meaning in life. And so as an art teacher, like, I love it when my students come to me with this kind of feeling and inquiry, because I feel like my role is to not give them answers, but to point them in directions of other artists who are thinking about this and making work. And they can see this sort of new paradigm in art making that is about trying to uncover the beauty, trying to uncover the universality of the human experience again, and the sense of connection and upliftedness. And so I would point them to artists like yourself, because I think that's what a lot of the younger generations are going to need, is a sense of hope and a sense that there is a path forward, even as seemingly dark and difficult as these waters that we're trudging through feel. And I think, to me, that's kind of an important role that we can play as communicators, as artists, is a role of like guiding and hope, and instilling hope and beauty again, and bring people back to that. Yeah. Do you ever teach, or have you ever taught? Has that been a part of your path as an artist?
No, not much. I mean, I have taught a little bit, but not much. I didn't
Yeah.
feel ready to teach. Now I feel like I could teach, but now I don't want to teach.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
but it's just making me think like of the angst in my own work, like when I was like in the 80s, when neo-expressionism was so huge in
Hmm.
grad school, and that was, you wanted your work to be really angsty, and I did create, that's how my work was focused, and then,
Hmm.
so it's kind of just interesting to think about the times. I mean, I think we are in a very angsty time, and a very dualistic time, and a challenging time in a different way than
Yeah.
I've ever experienced. And it's hard. It's hard. It's just hard times. I really, yeah. And it's hard to keep the light going, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like that's what we have to do, like more than
Yeah.
ever, in a
Yeah.
way. Like we
Yeah.
have to keep that going, and we have to be able to nurture those seeds of connection and awakening in people in some way, awakening to our interdependent nature, awakening to the fact that like we are one big family on this planet, and
Yeah.
that the way we treat each other on the political sphere, the way that we treat each other in the daily life, like this stuff matters ultimately. And it makes it hard because a lot of the people who are in positions of influence and power are acting like children.
Right.
And there's not, we're missing the wisdom, we're missing a sense of what direction are we actually going in.
Yeah.
And so I think making art in this time is, to some people it might look like a futile effort, or like it's not doing anything, but I think on some subtle way, on some subtle level, it's impacting people's consciousness, and it's helping them grow their awareness of themselves in relationship to the rest of the world. And to me, that's kind of how this thing needs to go. It's like little by little, one seed at a time, one painting at a time, one line at a time, one color at a time. And that's what builds to create the whole picture that we're all trying to collectively make together. And so I definitely look at you as an ally in this, even whether you're, conscious of that role or not. Like I can just tell by the energy you're putting out in the world that this is something that you're doing too.
I mean, I hope you're right.
I hope
I
I'm
hope
right
you're right.
too. So,
I love. Yeah, I feel like it's a really beautiful idealism. And
yeah.
that from your voice to everybody, let that be heard. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um, you know, that would be. And I hope I don't know.
I know it's a mystery, but that's what also makes life really interesting to live. If we knew where things were going, we knew what the
Yeah.
end was going to be, what would be the point of all this? Like we're creating this story together.
Yeah.
It's a collective storytelling, and
Yeah.
we each have a part to play in it.
Yeah.
And being an artist in these times, I feel like is a beautiful role to play. I'm grateful every day that I get to spend my time and energy not only making art and teaching it, but also connecting with people like yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really how this all works out, is through collaboration and connection and a community, a sense of community.
Well, this is a way you're using technology to create a community. So that's
Right?
all right, right, right. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a tool, right? Ultimately, these
Yeah.
things are all tools that we can use. And every tool has its benefit and every tool has its detriment. And hopefully we can be more skillful yielders of these tools as we grow and move forward.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you continue to grow in your art practice, like what do you feel is coming up on the horizon for you? Is there a new body of work that you're working on right now, or like what's going on in the studio for you these days?
Interesting that you asked. There is actually some new stuff budding that combines several elements. They do feel a little, a little more unsettled in some ways.
Hmm.
It's very challenging in terms of color. I started using, because in mixing, I end up having a lot of extra paint. So I'm just trying to be ecological within my studio and use already mixed colors, which aren't pure colors, and creating from kind of like the leftovers from other
Oh,
paint.
cool.
And so it's creating some color challenges. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but yeah, we'll see. There's kind of some new elements. Stay tuned.
Awesome.
Keep checking the Instagram.
Yes, everybody out there, you need to follow Audrey's work. In the show notes, I'll have links to her website, her Instagram, and information about the work that she does. But everybody who's listening out there, you got to give her a follow and just see the amazing things coming out of Audrey's studio. It's talk about uplifting, powerful, beautiful work for the spirit. I feel it. And I'm just grateful for you and spending time with me today to talk about all these ideas of painting. And then we got into some other bigger ideas too. But ultimately, I think we're grounded in on the same mission and really wanting to contribute in the same way to the world that we live in. And we want to bring hope and light and love, but we also want to bring a sense of groundedness to what we're doing. And I definitely see you doing that. And so thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mark.
Joining me on the podcast. So wonderful, and look forward to continuing to connect moving into the future.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Take care.
You too.
All right. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.